Disinformation is a very, very complex problem. And I think, as I've mentioned before, disinformation is the deliberate use of false information to deceive people.
Bienvenidos a todos y todas a esta charla de la serie Imagina el Mundo, realizado con el apoyo de Sobre, nuestro aliado regional para América Latina. En esta ocasión tenemos a Richard Stengel, que es exeditor de la revista Time y escritor. Fue director del National Constitution Center y trabajó como subsecretario de Estado durante la administración de Obama. Nos ha presentado en su charla previa su libro Guerras de la información, su más reciente ensayo, y esta vez vamos a responder algunas de las preguntas que nos han llegado a través de nuestras redes sociales y nuestra plataforma. Thank you, Richard, for this conversation. So now let us begin. First of all, we have a question from Mario Fernando Montes de Oca Herrerías from Mexico. And he asks, which do you think is the best path to fight all the sources of disinformation that currently exist?
What I think is the best way to fight all the different paths and sources of disinformation that exist? That's a very big question, and I wish I knew the answer to it. Disinformation is a very, very complex problem, and I think, as I've mentioned before, disinformation is the deliberate use of false information to deceive people, whereas misinformation is just information that's wrong. It may be wrong deliberately or may be wrong accidentally. I have been saying over and over that I think that government is not the answer, that the platform companies that host user-generated content, like Facebook, like Twitter, like Snapchat, etc., they need to police their own ecosystem, and they need to be held more liable by governments, by the United States government and, for example, the Mexican government, for publishing content that may be considered defamatory, that may be considered hate speech, that may be considered speech that is disinformation, deliberately trying to mislead. But it's very complicated because it's not easy to necessarily see disinformation. It doesn't come underlined in yellow. So it's a complex, multi-level problem that doesn't have one solution, even though I've just mentioned one.
Okay, perfect. The next question is from Irma Lovera de Sola from Spain. And she asks, do you think that Donald Trump has a chance to keep influencing U.S. politics and even win another election for the U.S. presidency?
Well, it's a bit of a depressing question. And speaking of depressing statistics, something like more than half of Republican voters believe Donald Trump's big lie that the election was stolen from him. And he is, as I call him in my book, the disinformationist in chief. In fact, I think there was a study recently that showed that a gigantic percentage of the disinformation about COVID-19 and the coronavirus actually came from Trump, which is further evidence to your questioner that he does hold outsized influence on people. Unfortunately, people seem susceptible to the disinformation that he puts out there, and I would wish that he wouldn't do it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the platform companies are trying to do what they can. Facebook announced last week that he would remain off their platform for another 2 years, and then only then would they decide whether or not to put him back on. But his influence is broad and big enough that even keeping him off social media doesn't diminish it or eliminate it completely.
Now that you mentioned COVID-19, we have a question from Gabriel Olivares from Mexico. He says, hello, Richard. Thank you for your wonderful talk. Can you please share your thoughts about disinformation in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been a very delicate and complex issue over the past year and a half? And are you optimistic about the outcome?
It's a good question, and I'll go further back into history. Times of disease, of plague, throughout human history have been times that disinformation has flourished. And this is another time because of the worldwide nature of COVID-19 and people's fear and misunderstanding and lack of understanding about it. It's also complicated by the fact that there are now state actors like China that have been very active in promoting their own narrative around the disease. Countries like Russia who've always been active in disinformation, putting out their narrative about the disease. I am hopeful in the sense that the scientific miracle of the vaccines has been so powerful and so helpful. If we look at the United States now, Joe Biden has set a goal of 70% of the American population being vaccinated by July 4th, which would give the United States herd immunity. I think that's just the first of what will happen all across the world. Probably in European countries first, but then spreading to South America, the African subcontinent, and we do have, there is a cure in the sense that it can prevent the pandemic from growing. So I am cautiously optimistic about that.
Our next question is from Sofia Palacios from Colombia. And she says, "It seems to me that journalists can often get caught in a prisoner's dilemma. Either they publish a potential but uncertain scoop before their rivals, or by being careful and not publishing it at all, they risk downgrading the excellence of their rapidity in the eyes of the readers. How can journalists avoid contributing to disinformation without making their readers feel like they are less informed than others? Great talk. Thank you."
It's a very good question. And my answer is a little bit unorthodox, because I think that the emphasis on scoops, on being first, is overemphasized in our societies. I mean, what does it matter when you're first with some bit of information that everybody else will have almost instantaneously? And so often that information is leaked, so it's arbitrary where it appears. I think the journalistic kind of herd instinct around scoops and being first is not very helpful to democratic societies and not helpful to individuals. So, when I was editor of Time, I didn't want traditional scoops. I wanted what we called conceptual scoops. Like, we would have the first new idea about something, the first new concept about something. That to me is more important. That's much more serving your readers or your audience than having some, factual information that will become ubiquitous almost instantly first. So the emphasis, the competition around scoops, I think, does a disservice to journalism. It makes it less thoughtful, makes it less valuable. So that's my not very traditional answer to that question.
Well, Maria Melendez from Ecuador asks, how can we prevent or fight the creation of troll factories like the ones you mentioned in your talk from becoming a trend in governments worldwide?
Well, I fear that that's too late. One of the things I talked about is how it's, a troll factory is a whole lot less expensive than buying an F-18 fighter jet. It's something that countries without tremendous amount of wherewithal of money can do. And, the Russians were sort of pioneers with the Internet Research Agency, which was a troll factory in St. Petersburg. I fear that lots of other countries are doing something similar, that they feel that they need to be in this kind of information or disinformation battle, that they can do it on their own, and then the other scary thing is that they can direct it towards their own domestic audiences. I think a lot of authoritarian states are probably thinking about or already creating domestic troll factories. So I don't have a great answer on what to do about that, other than to try to use factual, truth-based information to drown out the disinformationists. But that's easier said than done.
Okay, Noemi Barrios from Colombia asks, now, as individuals, how can we reduce the impact of our cognitive bias on the information that is being presented to us?
Well, that's a question that has stymied people for 2,000 years. I think, cognitive bias is a fancy name for what is human nature. That we're biased to get the information we already agree with. We're biased against information that we disagree with. We have biases that when people give us information that is against what we already believe, it makes us double down on that belief. I mean, maybe only the saints in history were immune to that. And even the saints were susceptible to it. So I think, part of it is being aware of it. And I've always cited the great Daniel Kahneman, who said that, you can't trust what your brain tells you that you know. And I think being able to separate yourself sometimes from your own instincts, your own feelings, and try to analyze them and say, well, is that really true? Or shouldn't I be open to this information? Again, not every human being does that. But I wish we did, because we have to be skeptical about the information that we get. We have to look at its provenance, at its origin. We have to look at how it complies with what we already know or already think we know. So we shouldn't just be easy receptacles of information. There should be friction between the information that's given to us and what we accept as facts and truth.
Okay. What is the biggest challenge you encountered when creating the Global Engagement Center?
Well, the biggest challenge is, again, and I came to this slowly, that government is often the worst messenger for the message they want to get out there, particularly if that message is to go against people that are creating disinformation. People don't trust governments, and they often don't trust their own government. And so this idea that government should be in the countering disinformation business, which a lot of people accepted in the beginning, I came to no longer accept, and I think people in government did too. So the Global Engagement Center became more of a monitoring group of an agency, that it monitored disinformation, it monitored misinformation, it found the sources of it. It didn't attempt to counter it, and I think in the end that's a good thing. And I as I come back to what I said earlier, I think that is the job of the private sector much more than governments, because governments are often not trusted by the people that they're trying to persuade, which is sometimes sad.
Okay, how can we continue producing and consuming in-depth journalism in the era of social media, especially when so many people consume their news from their Twitter feed? That's a question from Esteban Gonzalez Lopez.
Yes, it's a good question. It's something I've thought about. I mean, one of the paradoxes of the era of social media is that long-form journalism, in many cases and places, is doing better than it ever has before. So there's an appetite for the instant, but then there's an appetite also for in-depth, investigative, well-written journalism. The sites that deal with that are doing better. Sales of books that are long-form journalism are doing well. So I think it works both ways. I'm a fan of Twitter. I think journalists have to have a lot of arrows in their quiver. That is, they have to be able to do short form and instant form, and also be able to do long form. They need to do audio. They need to do video. I think, again, counter to what a lot of people think, this is an era of great journalism. There's great journalism being created now in all different forms and ways than we've ever had before, using those new tools: video, audio, social media. So I think the appetite for something good and small gives you an appetite for something good and big. And so I'm, again, cautiously optimistic about that. The sad thing is that sometimes this good journalism doesn't reach the people that really need persuading. I'm not sure how to solve that problem.
The next question, our final question, is from Marta Rocio Jimenez from Colombia, and she says, in Latin America, we have overall lower levels of education that contribute to the proliferation of disinformation and corrupt governments that benefit from a misinformed population. What do you think about the situation in Latin America? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
There's a famous American poet who said that the light at the end of the tunnel is the train. I don't mean to be pessimistic. I just thought I would say that and hopefully get a couple of laughs. But I think I accept the premise of the question, and I think the combination of a not well-educated public and an authoritarian government's use of social media and disinformation is a very dangerous existential threat to democracy and freedom and the well-being of people's lives. And unfortunately, there's no short-term solution. I mean, educating a country's population takes generations. Allowing people to vote and decide on their own leaders is the very basis of democracy, which I think will also help dissipate disinformation. But and while I'm not pessimistic, I think there are real challenges in Latin America that the questioner mentioned. Thank you. I mean, this has been a fantastic experience participating in the Hay Festival. Questions have been great. You all have been great. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. And do you have a final message for our audience as we close this interview?
Just that, I mean, I'm encouraged by the questions, by the passion that people have about this subject. That how do we try to purge or lessen the amount of disinformation in the public sphere on these new platforms that have become the place that we all debate and create and exchange content. So, to me, that's the beginning of a solution, that people want to get rid of this kind of content. But as I said from the beginning, it's, disinformation has been around since information started, and it will always be with us. Let's just hope that it won't be so much with us in the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for this wonderful Q&A session. And thank you for all our listeners. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.